There is a moment happening right now, somewhere inside you, that you cannot name yet. No siren, no sign in the sky. Just an ordinary day that looks exactly like yesterday. And somehow it isn't. Most people wait for their life to change the way a storm arrives. Loud, obvious, undeniable. So they keep scanning the horizon for lightning, missing the quiet work already happening beneath their feet, in a place no one ever taught them to look. Carl Jung spent his whole life studying this exact blindness. He believed the deepest movements of the soul never ask permission from the conscious mind. They begin in the dark, in the unconscious, long before you have a single thought about them, long before you have language for any of it. He wrote something that should stop you cold. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This isn't abstract philosophy meant to stay on a page. Jung built this idea from decades spent sitting across from real patients, watching the same pattern repeat itself again and again. A person insists their life is stable, even content, right up until the moment something cracks open and reveals it was never stable at all, just quiet in a way that looked like peace from the outside. Sit with that for a second. Something in you has been steering your life for years, quietly, without asking, without ever once introducing itself. What you're about to hear isn't a lesson, it's a mirror. Somewhere in the next few minutes, you're going to recognize a piece of your own life you never had words for, and once you see it, you won't be able to look away from it again. Number 1. When the shadow starts to move. It usually starts with something small and a little embarrassing to admit out loud. You snap at someone over nothing. You feel a flash of irritation watching a stranger succeed at something you've quietly wanted for yourself. You catch yourself resenting a friend's happiness for half a second before you bury it under a smile and a congratulations. And afterward, you tell yourself it meant nothing. Just a mood. Just a bad day. Jung would disagree with you. He called this part of us the shadow. Not evil, not broken, just hidden. Every quality you learned to push down as a child because it wasn't safe to show it, it doesn't vanish. It goes underground and keeps living somewhere inside you. The anger you were told was ugly. The ambition you were told was selfish. The need you were told was too much for other people to handle. None of it disappeared the day you learned to hide it. It just stopped speaking in words and started speaking in moods, in sudden irritations, in reactions that feel a little too large for the moment that triggered them. That is why the irritation you feel towards someone else so often tells you more about yourself than it ever tells you about them. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. The people who make your jaw tighten without an obvious reason are frequently mirrors, showing you a piece of yourself you never got permission to own." I think of a man named David, who sat across from me in a therapy room a few years ago. Early 30s, good job in finance, the kind of life people compliment at dinner parties without really looking at the person living it. He came in because he couldn't explain why he felt hollow. Nothing had gone wrong, that was the problem. Nothing had gone wrong, and still something felt off, like static underneath a clear signal, like a room that looks perfectly clean but somehow still feels wrong to stand in. As David talked, week after week, a pattern kept surfacing. He described feeling a strange, sharp annoyance whenever a particular coworker spoke up in meetings without hesitation. Confident, unapologetic, never once checking the room for permission before saying what he thought. David couldn't stand being near it. When I asked him what that kind of confidence reminded him of, something in his face changed. He went quiet for a long moment, and then he remembered being 9 years old, raising his hand too often in class, and a teacher telling him, in front of everyone, to sit down and let other people talk for once. He learned that day to make himself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook, and it worked. He got praised for it. Good listener, not a troublemaker, easy to manage. That 9-year-old boy never actually left him. He just went underground, waiting. And every time someone else did the exact thing he was never allowed to do, that boy knocked on the door from the inside, louder than David expected, louder than he could explain to anyone at the dinner table. This is what the shadow does. It doesn't announce itself with a name tag or a polite introduction. It shows up as the coworker who annoys you for reasons you can't fully explain. It shows up as the sudden wave of shame after a small mistake, wildly out of proportion to what actually happened. It shows up as the thing you swore as a teenager you'd never become, staring back at you from the mirror on a particularly honest, particularly bad night. Think about the last time someone got under your skin in a way that felt bigger than the moment deserved. What if that reaction was never really about them at all? Picture a house you've lived in for years. Every room familiar, every hallway memorized in the dark. Except one door at the end of the hall that has always been locked, for as long as you can remember. You stopped questioning it so long ago you almost forgot it was there at all. But some nights, in the quiet after everyone else has gone to sleep, you swear you hear something moving on the other side of it. That locked room is not your enemy. It never was. It is the part of you still waiting, patiently, to be let back in. David eventually did something most people never get around to doing. He asked that coworker to grab coffee, not to confront him, just to understand him a little better. What he found wasn't confidence built on arrogance. It was confidence built on years of a childhood where speaking up had actually been safe. David wasn't angry at the man anymore after that. He was grieving the 9-year-old who never got the same chance. Number 2, the mask that once saved you. Every one of us learned to perform long before we ever learned to think about performing. You figured out earlier than you'd probably like to admit, which version of you got approval and which version got silence, or worse, punishment. So you built something. Jung called it the persona, from the Latin word for the mask worn by actors on a stage. A mask shaped, piece by piece, by what the people around you needed to see in order to keep loving you. The competent one, the easygoing one, the one who never falls apart in front of anyone. Something almost no one says clearly enough about the persona is that it was never the villain of this story. It kept you safe. It got you through school, through family dinners that could have gone badly, through job interviews where honesty about your actual state of mind would have cost you the offer. The problem was never that you built a mask in the first place. Everyone does. The problem starts the day you forget you're still wearing one. I remember a woman named Claire, who came to therapy describing herself, almost proudly, in the very first session, as the strong one. Everyone in her family said it about her, had said it for years. Friends leaned on her during their own breakups and crises. Co-workers assumed, without ever really checking, that she had everything together. Claire had built an entire identity, brick by brick, around never once being the person who needed help. One evening, sitting alone in her car outside her own apartment, engine off, keys still in her hand, she suddenly couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked how she was doing, and actually waited long enough for the real answer. And then, in the same breath, she realized something worse. She couldn't remember the last time she had asked herself that question either, honestly, and waited for her own real answer. She knew exactly what everyone else needed from her at any given moment. She had almost no idea what she needed from herself. That is the trap hidden inside the persona. It gets so good at reflecting what other people expect to see that the true face underneath starts to blur. Slowly, quietly, even to the one person who should recognize it without hesitation. You. Claire eventually told her sister, for the first time in years, that she'd had a genuinely hard week. Nothing dramatic, just honest. Her sister's response surprised her more than she expected. Relief. Her sister admitted she'd always felt slightly intimidated by how together Claire seemed, and had been quietly waiting for permission to be imperfect around her too. Jung wrote something that still lands like a quiet punch to the chest. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not the world rejecting you, not public failure. The most terrifying thing is looking directly at who you actually are underneath the performance, without flinching, without editing the parts that don't fit the story you've told everyone, including yourself. Think of a mirror hanging in a gallery, admired by everyone who walks past it. People compliment its frame, its shine, how perfectly it fits the room it hangs in. Almost nobody stops long enough to ask what the mirror is actually reflecting back. That is what it can feel like to live entirely inside your persona, praised endlessly for the surface, unseen and often unknown at the center. Here is the part that stings the most, once you're honest enough to look at it directly. The mask that once protected you can quietly turn into the very wall that isolates you. You can be surrounded every single day by people who genuinely adore the role you play for them, and still feel completely alone inside it. Because the one thing they love was never entirely, fully you. If any part of this is landing a little too close for comfort right now, that discomfort is not a signal to look away. It's information your own psyche is trying to hand you. Sit with it for a second before you keep watching. Number 3. The fog. The ego refuses to enter. You know the feeling. You want to make the change. Leave the job that stopped fitting you 2 years ago. End the relationship that's gone quiet and cold in all the ways that matter. Say the honest thing you've swallowed 100 times over 100 dinners. And still, you wait. You tell yourself you're being careful, responsible, smart about timing. But underneath that story is something much simpler. Something most people never say out loud, even to themselves. You're afraid, and waiting feels safer than moving, even when the waiting itself is costing you something every single day. Jung would say this particular fear belongs to the ego, and the ego has good reason to be afraid. The ego is only a small piece of who you actually are. It's the part of you that thinks, plans, worries about tomorrow, and manages the daily business of being a person in the world. But beneath it, much older and far larger, sits something Jung called the self, the full and total truth of who you are. Most of it living in the unconscious, entirely outside the ego's reach or control. The ego hates that arrangement. It wants to run the whole show, every scene, every line. So when life asks you to step into something uncertain, something the ego cannot fully predict, measure, or manage in advance, it panics quietly and dresses that panic up as wisdom. It whispers, "Wait for more information. Wait until you're completely sure. Wait until it's finally, provably safe." Here is the part almost nobody says plainly enough. That perfect certainty never arrives. Not because you haven't waited long enough, not because you're missing some crucial piece of data that will eventually surface. It never arrives because it was never available in the first place. It was never on the table. Picture yourself alone in a small boat, out on a wide, still lake, and fog rolls in so thick you can no longer see the shore in any direction you turn. Every instinct in your body tells you to stop rowing and simply wait for the fog to lift on its own. But the lake doesn't care how long you're willing to wait. Drifting in place, unseen and unmoving in open water, is far more dangerous than rowing blind toward the direction you believe the shore is waiting in. The fog itself was never the real threat. Standing still inside it was. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." The certainty you keep waiting for was never going to arrive from outside conditions finally lining up perfectly, one final piece clicking into place. It comes, if it comes at all, from turning inward and rowing anyway, fog and all, trusting a direction you cannot fully see yet. This is the strange gift hidden inside uncertainty, the part that almost nobody thinks to look for. It is the only condition under which real change can actually take place, because it forces the ego to loosen its grip, even briefly. As long as you can control and predict every outcome in advance, nothing in you is required to grow. Growth needs a little blindness to do its work. It always has. I think of a man named Michael, a client I worked with for close to 2 years, who spent almost 18 months circling the decision to leave a marriage that had quietly stopped working for both people inside it. He kept waiting for a sign clear enough that he wouldn't have to take responsibility for choosing. A single dramatic betrayal. A moment so obviously wrong that leaving would require no courage at all, only reaction. That moment never came, because the marriage wasn't failing in dramatic ways. It was failing in quiet ones. Eventually, Michael told me something that stayed with me. He said he finally understood he wasn't actually waiting for clarity. He was waiting for permission to stop being afraid, and nobody was ever going to hand him that. There's a reason this particular fear feels so convincing from the inside. The ego isn't lying to you out of malice. It's doing exactly the job it was built to do, which is keep you safe, predictable, and intact. It was never designed to welcome the unknown. So when you feel that pull to wait just a little longer, that isn't weakness talking. It's an old, loyal system doing its job a little too well, past the point where the job still serves you. Where in your life right now are you calling it patience, when it might actually be fear wearing patience like a very convincing costume? If that question just made you a little uncomfortable, tell me in one word right now what you're actually waiting on. Sometimes typing it out honestly is the first real step you take all week. Number 4. The season no one can see. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from trying, genuinely trying, and watching absolutely nothing change on the outside, week after week, month after month. You've started sleeping a little better. You've stopped reacting the way you used to when someone criticizes you carelessly. You catch yourself pausing, just barely, before you say the cruel thing you used to say without thinking. And still, your job looks the same. Your relationships look the same on the surface. Nobody around you has noticed a single thing shifting, and some days that silence from the outside world feels almost unbearable. This is usually the exact moment people quit on themselves. Not because they actually failed at anything, because they mistook invisible progress for no progress at all, and gave up right before it would have shown itself. Jung understood something about the unconscious that most people never stop to consider. It doesn't operate on the clock the conscious mind lives by. When you begin healing something buried, something old, the real work is happening at a depth you cannot watch directly. The same way you cannot watch your own hair grow strand by strand or your own bones knit back together after a fracture. You only get to see the result much later, once it's already quietly finished. I remember a woman named Elena, who I met through a small process group years ago, describing months where she felt, in her own words, like she was moving backward instead of forward. More tired than usual, more irritable with people she loved, less patient than she'd been even before she'd started paying attention to any of this work in the first place. She almost stopped coming to the group entirely, convinced the whole thing wasn't working for her the way it seemed to be working for everyone else in the room. Then one ordinary afternoon, her sister said something sharp and dismissive over the phone. The exact kind of comment that used to wreck Elena's entire day and send her spiraling for hours afterward. And this time she felt almost nothing close to what she used to feel. Just a small, steady calm sitting where the old wound used to live. She hadn't noticed the wound closing while it was happening. She only noticed one ordinary Tuesday that it no longer hurt when something pressed directly against it. What made Elena's story stick with me wasn't the ending. It was the 18 ordinary Tuesdays before it. The ones where nothing happened, where she almost quit on herself more than once. Nobody hands out credit for the months where you simply didn't give up. But those are usually the months doing the actual work. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." He wasn't only describing grand, dramatic breakdowns. He meant this slower, quieter kind of pain too. The particular discomfort of sitting inside a season where nothing visible confirms that your effort is doing anything at all. Where you're forced to keep faith with a process you can't see the results of yet. Dreams matter here more than most people give them credit for. Jung believed dreams were one of the few reliable places where the unconscious reports back on work it's already quietly doing, long before your waking mind can put language to any of it. If your dreams have felt stranger or more intense lately, more vivid, more unsettled than usual, that isn't random noise. Something underneath is active, even while the visible surface of your daily life looks completely untouched. There's a reason so many people report their most vivid, strangest dreams during exactly the periods of life that feel the most stagnant on the surface. The mind quiets down enough during sleep for the unconscious to finally get a word in, uninterrupted by the noise of the day. If you've been waking up remembering more than usual lately, that's rarely a coincidence worth ignoring. Picture a seed resting under snow in the dead middle of winter. From above, the field looks lifeless, frozen, empty in every direction as far as you can see. But underneath that frozen surface, hidden from every eye, the seed is quietly doing the single most important work of its entire existence, preparing for a spring that nobody standing above ground can see coming yet. You are allowed to be in that season right now, exactly where you are. You are allowed to feel like absolutely nothing is happening while everything underneath is happening at once. Just don't let the silence convince you that you've stopped growing. Silence and stillness are not the same thing as absence. Number 5. When life starts answering back. Something happens after you've spent real, sustained time doing this quiet, invisible kind of work. Something that catches even deeply skeptical people off guard every single time. Life starts talking back. Jung gave this phenomenon a name: synchronicity. Not luck, not superstition, nothing mystical in the vague sense people often mean when they use that word carelessly. He defined it simply and precisely as a meaningful coincidence, a moment when what's happening inside you and what's happening outside you line up in a way that plain, ordinary cause and effect cannot fully explain on its own. You've likely felt a version of this already, more than once, even if you brushed past it without naming it. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, seemingly out of nowhere, and they call you that same afternoon. You finally decide, after a long internal struggle, to leave something that no longer fits the person you've become. And within days, an opportunity appears that seems built specifically for exactly who you're turning into. It feels too precise, too well-timed, to be pure chance. And Jung would tell you your instinct here is worth trusting, not dismissing. Here is the part that quietly changes how you understand your own timing, maybe permanently. Synchronicity rarely shows up before the inner shift happens. It shows up after. It isn't the cause of your transformation, it's the echo of it, arriving late. Like thunder after lightning has already struck somewhere you couldn't see. The outer world doesn't rearrange itself in advance to convince you to change. It responds, often precisely, once you already have. I think about a man named James, who spent nearly a full year working through the quiet, unglamorous parts of this process, with almost nothing to show for it on the outside. Facing a shadow he'd been actively avoiding for over a decade. Loosening a persona he'd worn so long, it had started to feel less like a mask and more like his actual skin. Sitting inside long stretches, months at a time, where absolutely nothing on the surface of his life seemed different to anyone watching from outside. Then, almost out of nowhere, an old colleague he hadn't spoken to in 3 years reached out about a project that matched, almost detail for detail, what James had only recently started imagining for his own future. At nearly the exact moment he'd finally admitted the truth of what he actually wanted, mostly just to himself, in a quiet moment nobody else witnessed. He hadn't sent out a single resume. He hadn't announced anything to anyone in his life. He told me afterward that it felt less like something arriving to him by pure chance, and much more like something finally catching up to where he had already, quietly, arrived on his own. This is exactly why waiting for the perfect external moment before you allow yourself to change anything gets the entire order backwards, every time. The perfect moment was never a gate you had to wait for from the outside. It's a byproduct, a natural consequence, of movement that already happened on the inside first. Line up the inner world before anything else. The outer world tends to follow, eventually, on its own timing, not yours, and rarely on the schedule you would have chosen for it. It's worth saying plainly that synchronicity isn't a reward for good behavior, and it isn't proof you did everything correctly. It's simply what alignment tends to look like from the outside, once enough of the inner noise has quieted down for you to actually notice it happening around you. Has something like this ever happened to you? A coincidence that felt too precisely timed to be nothing at all? Drop it in the comments below. You might be genuinely surprised how many other people reading through the comments recognize that exact same feeling from their own life, sometimes down to the smallest detail. Number 6. The conversation between ego and self. Everything we've walked through so far has been quietly leading here, to this exact point. You've felt the shadow start to move, maybe recognized a piece of your own reflection in someone who irritated you for reasons you couldn't fully name. You've noticed the mask you've been wearing so long, it started to feel indistinguishable from your actual face. You've stood at the edge of the fog, ego demanding a certainty the world was never actually going to hand over, no matter how long you waited for it. You've sat inside a season where nothing visible proved you were changing at all, and stayed anyway. Maybe you've even felt life start answering back in ways too specific and too well-timed to easily dismiss as coincidence. All of it points, quietly and steadily, toward one final moment. A moment that happens in complete privacy, where absolutely no one else is there to confirm it happened at all, where there is no applause waiting on the other side. Jung called the deepest part of us the self, distinct from the ego and far larger than it in every sense. The ego is the voice that manages your calendar, worries about what people think of you at dinner, and keeps track of your reputation. The self is the whole of who you actually are, conscious and unconscious held together as one complete thing, light and shadow both included, never chosen apart from each other, but carried as a single, unified whole. For most of a lifetime, the ego runs the entire conversation, loud and constant, while the self stays quiet in the background, patient in a way the ego can never quite understand or trust. But there comes a point, usually only after the shadow has been faced honestly, after the mask has loosened its grip a little, after the fog has been walked through anyway, despite every instinct screaming to wait. When the ego finally goes quiet enough to hear something it has been talking over for years without even realizing it. I think back again to David, the man from the very beginning of this video, the one who felt hollow despite a life that looked entirely complete from every outside angle. Months into working through all of this, he described sitting alone in his kitchen on an entirely unremarkable Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic had happened that day. No breakthrough, no difficult conversation, no obvious turning point he could point back to later. And somewhere inside that ordinary stillness, an answer he'd been quietly circling for months simply arrived, calm and certain. Almost as if it had been waiting patiently the entire time for him to finally stop talking over it long enough to hear it clearly. That kind of moment rarely looks like anything worth mentioning to someone else afterward. David didn't tell his friends about that Tuesday evening. There was nothing dramatic to report. No story with a clean beginning and end. He just noticed, days later, that a decision he'd been avoiding for months suddenly felt simple. Not easy, simple. The difference matters more than people realize. There's a passage from the poet Rainer Maria Rilke that fits here almost too perfectly. An idea he once offered to a young writer who had written to him, struggling with this exact kind of uncertainty. Rilke suggested living the questions themselves, rather than rushing toward answers you aren't yet ready to hold, trusting that the living itself would gradually lead you, some distant day, into the answer without you fully noticing the arrival. Jung would have recognized that instinct immediately, completely. Real transformation is rarely a single lightning strike of clarity. It's closer to a long, patient conversation your ego finally agrees to stop dominating, session by quiet session. This is also why the timeline never looks the way you expect it to. Some people reach this quiet conversation with themselves in their 20s. Others don't reach it until well into their 60s, after decades of a life that looked entirely settled from the outside. Jung himself didn't consider this work finished at any fixed age. He saw individuation as a lifelong unfolding, not a milestone you hit once and then move past. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Not who you were praised for being at family gatherings, not who kept everyone else comfortable and undisturbed. Who you actually are, underneath every single mask you ever needed to build in order to survive long enough to get here." Freedom, in this particular sense, was never really about eliminating fear entirely. It's the moment the ego finally stops fighting the self for control of the wheel, even if only for a little while at first. That fight can go on for years, sometimes for an entire lifetime. if nobody ever names it clearly enough to see it for what it actually is. But once you do see it, clearly you can't fully unsee it again. Something in you already knows that. Where in your life is your ego still gripping the wheel a little too tightly, right at this exact moment? The shadow that finally got a real hearing after years of being ignored. The mask that started to loosen its grip, one honest evening at a time. The fog you walked through without ever getting the permission you were originally waiting for. The season that did its most important work in complete silence, unseen by anyone. The moment life quietly answered back, right on time, though never on your schedule, and the conversation your ego finally, reluctantly, let the rest of you finish. None of it needed an audience. None of it needed applause from anyone standing outside it. That was never how this particular kind of change was built to work. Here is the paradox worth carrying with you long after this video ends. You don't wait for the world to change first, and then finally let yourself change in response to it. You change first, quietly, in private, in the parts of yourself nobody else will ever fully see, and only afterward does the outer world slowly begin to catch up with who you've already, quietly, become. Jung wrote, "In all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order." Whatever feels unclear or unsteady in your life right now may not be falling apart at all. It may simply be reorganizing itself into a shape you can't fully make out yet from where you're currently standing. You don't need a dramatic exit from your old life to prove any of this is real. You don't need witnesses, applause, or a single person to understand what shifted and why. The quietest transformations are very often the most permanent ones, precisely because they were never built for anyone else's approval in the first place. 6 thresholds sound tidy when you list them out like this, one after another in order. Real life rarely moves in a straight line through them. You might face the shadow, loosen the mask, then find yourself right back in the fog months later over something entirely different. That isn't failure, and it isn't proof any of this didn't work the first time. Jung never described individuation as a staircase you climb once and finish. He described it as a spiral, the same territory revisited again and again, each time from a little higher up, with a little more of yourself finally along for the ride. If any part of this found you today, tell me one single word in the comments for whatever is quietly shifting in you right now. Fear, clarity, relief, exhaustion. Whatever it honestly is, name it. Naming it is very often the first real step of the entire process, even when it feels too small to matter. If this reached something true in you, share it with someone who might need to hear it exactly the way you needed to hear it today, without either of you having to explain why. And if you want to keep walking this particular road, together, subscribe, because this is only the beginning of a much longer journey inward, one neither of us has to walk alone. Nobody is watching the moment you finally decide to become who you actually are. No one ever will be, not fully, but it will still be real, and it will still completely be yours.